Assalamu alaikum and welcome to this week's edition of Sisters Corner, the topical show where we're talking to different guests who are doing interesting and exciting things in the world of literature, art, community, and subjects are of relevance to all people, particularly Muslim women, we're interested in. So without any further ado, I'd just like to welcome my friend and colleague, Uzma. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum assalam.
Thanks for coming, Uzma.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, fantastic. So Uzma is an artist, and today's show is all about creative expressions and how Uzma uses her artistic skills and talents to engage with the communities and to talk about some really difficult subjects. Would that be fair to say?
It is fair to say, yeah.
Yeah? So you're not just sat in a room somewhere drawing pretty pictures?
No, I wish it was like that, but it's not. The world doesn't work like that, does it? So
that's true. Super. So would you just tell us a little bit about yourself? You know, what are you up to and how have you arrived to where you've got to?
Well, I've trained in theatre design and also youth and community development work, and actually my relationship with art and creativity goes back to probably my being at school and doing my A-levels and GCSEs, and I was always very interested in art because of the options that it opened up for me in terms of expression, and really enjoy being in the studio at school, in the art studio and art rooms, and I had some really good teachers, so I pursued that as the area of interest through my sort of options and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Went to art college in school. I then went on to university in Liverpool, and practiced in the industry for a little while. So I've worked nationally with doing theatre work, but also done a lot of work in Bradford and Keighley and Leeds and quite regionally as well. And then I went back into study, and I've done my youth and community development degree as well. And that also offered another lens and a way of enabling storytelling, because for me I think creativity is all about storytelling, and for me I'm moving towards trying to bring the visual arts and storytelling together.
Okay, so we'll talk a bit more about storytelling in a little bit, if that's okay. So you were at school and you developed this interest in art. What kind of art were we talking about? Well,
I think at A-levels and GCSE, and also actually foundation art and design level 1, you're really open to many different mediums, and I think that was a really exciting thing. You start with mark making, which is simply about trying to assess what kind of a mark do you make on a canvas, or print making,
Right.
Media, photography, painting, fine arts, 3D.
Pottery? Pottery?
Pottery. I didn't do as much clay work, but I do now actually.
Right. I used to enjoy that in school.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so I think school and college offered a real space to play, and there was a structure through obviously the curriculum back then, which enabled you to really discover things that are within you. So that's how I got into it, really.
Okay. So, as we know, not every parent, but a lot of South Asian parents want their children to go to school, do really well, and then become a doctor, lawyer, dentist, and not even a dentist necessarily, you know. So when you went home and said to your parents, of course you're going to go into further education, but you're going to go and study art, what was the reaction like?
Well, I think, alhamdulillah, I'm quite blessed that I think my parents are quite understanding parents.
Oh, alhamdulillah.
Though there has always been that kind of curiosity about what is this, and how, it's not going into the art world and practicing doing creative work isn't a 9-to-5 job. Now I was always quite a keen student, and I'd be up quite early hours in the morning finishing off a piece of art homework, or so I think probably early on they could probably see that I was probably quite creative,
and dedicated to your studies?
Yeah, that's it, yeah. And of course I did do well in other subjects as well, which it kind of supplements all of that creative work as well. Something really special that I got quite early on in my career was one of my first jobs that I worked on as a freelance theatre designer was working with a company called Black Country Touring, who were based in the West Midlands, and we did a promenade theatre show with a community cast and a professional cast, which was about the corner shop and corner shop life. So it was basically, they did a set of interviews with local shopkeepers, and it was really about thinking about, well, how did they set up their livelihoods, and the story of the evolving corner shop. And back then, you know, the corner shops were going into a decline. Because I grew up in corner shop and our family grew up in corner shops, you know, I forced my dad. I said, look, you're going to come and see this show of mine. My mum and dad and my family as well, and they absolutely loved it. It was like them seeing their own life on stage. So I say to them now, if you don't come and see any more of my work, it's okay, as long as you've seen that one.
But I suppose it helps people really picture what you do as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think because practicing at a professional level in theatre and theatre making, it like I said, it's not a conventional, it's not a 9 to 5, it's not a, you know, it's a very collaborative, it can be quite high intensity work at times. So alhamdulillah, I'm quite blessed that they do understand that. I mean, they've got a curiosity about it. It's not all plain sailing. But there is an understanding about, you know, and sometimes they come, you know, my mum will sometimes come and say, oh, well, come on, I'll sew this up for you, or let's do this together, or I'll say, oh, mum, how do you think?
They'll help you with your set design.
Yeah, and it's great because, you know, my mum gets to meet loads of people, and people get to know my mum, and it's a nice way of really opening up a world.
And it's something for you both to do sometimes together as well, isn't it? Which, when you've got a career, it's hard to sometimes engage back with the family as well, because you're just so busy, and when you are home, you're just spent and tired, and so it's quite nice that they can come out and about.
Definitely.
So I'd imagine, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, that in theatre design and set design, there's not a lot of Muslim representation, female or male actually. How have you found that experience when you've been with the sort of theatre design fraternity?
Yeah, I mean, diversity is a really big buzzword, I'd say, in the arts industry generally at the moment, and has been for a long time. But yeah, I mean, I guess if we're talking specifically about design, there's probably a lot less South Asian faces. That doesn't mean that there isn't, but most likely they are probably based in London, and because that's where a lot of the work is. And I think it's also quite a usual practice, I guess, for people to go and search for the work and try and settle in a place where the work is much more accessible, perhaps. I think something that I mean, for me, the art world, or to have skills in a particular genre of art or a particular discipline, you know, they're really sort of transferable skills. You can take them out into community settings. You can do them in different kinds of, you know, you can put on different workshops. The concepts of space and storytelling are really significant to me. And so I feel that with my sort of heritage and the story that I bring and my identity, whether that's Muslim identity, South Asian identity, I'm able to bring questions, I'm able to facilitate through the arts about the questions that people have, and I feel like I'm able to really facilitate that. So
I suppose what you're saying, correct me if I'm wrong, is that you use your art to comment on, to engage with the world as it exists now, and help people understand and explore that as well. Would that be fair?
I think so, definitely. I mean, our world is changing before our eyes. It's quite a scary world, and there's a lot of high emotion that's out there, and it's very real, and we need to listen, and we need to find different peaceful ways of being able to have that dialogue and think about actually really where are we in the world and what is our place in the world. And you know, we use this word kind of activism, and there's a lot of animation that happens when various world events happen, whether it's Trump coming into power or whether it's Asian women being demoralised in the media, and it can make you very angry. So places to connect are really important, but when we can add a lens of creativity to that, I think it can really help us think through our thoughts.
So give us some real life examples where, and I know you've got loads, where you've used art to help that sort of expression, you know, for people to come together, to express solidarity, to express concern, but also resolve in a creative way.
There's a few examples. I guess one is recently we had the Bridges Not Walls, which was a national day of action.
International, wasn't it?
International Day of Action, where me and other artists, so Where Bradford is a collective in Bradford city centre, and it's a very grassroots community-led kind of a space. So a lot of us came together to create a banner which said Bridges Not Walls, but then we were able to add our thoughts, our opinions. We were able to have a dialogue around the table while we were being creative. We were able to think through our thoughts while being creative.
But what you were also doing, if I remember correctly, is Bridges Not Walls was an international movement, if you like, on the day of President Trump's inauguration, and people were basically saying and using it as a way to say we won't be divided by walls. Instead, we'll build bridges, we'll get to know each other, we refuse to buy into the politics of hate and division, and that's what you were doing. And if I remember correctly, there was a strong feeling that something like that should happen here in Bradford, but it happened all over the UK as well. And yourself and a few other artists got together and thought, what can we do? So some of that was the actual workshop banner making, but then you were also at the event on the day.
We had an event on the morning of the inauguration day, the 20th of January, at the city centre, and people who were angry came out, or people who felt that they needed to connect came out. You know, there were other community groups, like the refugee groups, and some religious groups as well, who came out and they made their own banners with their colleagues. You know, in staff meeting, they had a creative session as opposed to, you know, to just talking about work. You know, and people who are really affected by the words that Trump uses, for example, came out and said, yes, we are going to come out and we are going to protest. We are going to go for a march around City Park, and we are going to sing loud, and we're going to be peaceful, but we're going to say what we feel and not be scared of that.
And I think it's a confusing world and upsetting actually with a lot of us. I mean, there's increase in hate crime, increase in Islamophobia. There seems to be an increase in sort of sexism and gender inequality as well. So I think it's been quite a worrying time for a lot of people. And I know I've been in various spaces as well, and people actually just sometimes need a way to come together and something to focus on. But then that fine line between just being angry and cross and actually making a more of a positive space. And I think that's where some of the artwork comes in actually, because it softens things but also amplifies it.
Yeah, I think we can sometimes get in a, like the language that sometimes can get used about art is that it can be a really softly thing, and you know, I think different kinds of the universe is a really big place, and we should have space for every kind of opinion. And I think that the art can really, it can be there to entertain, it can be there to facilitate, it can be an escape in some ways, but it can really be there for people to express. You know, it's there as a tool of expression, and I really believe that it exists within us all. I think you know, I feel that it's a God-given thing that exists within us.
Yeah. We're supposed to, you know, connect. We're supposed to. We're kind of instructed to go and seek knowledge and to ponder and to question and to wonder where we fit into the world and actually what we can offer the world as well. And if things go wrong, we're not supposed to despair. We're supposed to pick up and work out how we can fix things and fix ourselves, obviously, first and foremost, and do right by, you know, our Lord, and do right by our society as well as ourselves. Something else I'd like to touch on with you now, because I think it's fascinating how you use your skill set, which are, you know, vast, to apply to different situations and different societal issues, if you like. So could you tell me a little bit more about the prison project? You were working in a prison for a while, weren't you?
I was. I've been to a few, actually. I have been
Not for criminal behaviour.
Not for criminal behaviour, purely to facilitate and educate in a way. Yeah, so I've predominantly worked with males in prisons, but also young females as well. And the work that I've done is mainly sort of informal education, so it's going in, having a chat with some of the offenders. Recently, my most recent work that I did there was last year I made a little puppet show, and it's very rare that some of the offenders will get a Families Day. So there's because of the sort of structure within prisons that exists. You know, each prison will have its own sort of way of working, and so some have an allocated Families Day, or several over the year. So I went along to this. I was invited to this Families Day, perform my puppet piece with the children, with the dads, with and yeah, it was quite an emotional thing actually for me, because I went back the following week, and I've never seen these grown men were quite emotional, and it made me kind of go, oh God, is that actually, there's for me a piece of work. It was like the kind of soft outcomes that you're supposed to have a tick box to on you know, that for me was the confirmation that this works and this is important. So a lot of the prison's work is really important. So
with your puppet show, what kind of themes were you exploring?
Well, that piece actually, it was quite a happy piece of work.
Which is good.
Which is good. It's important that we can have happy things in the world as well. And so actually it was called Artist Ordeal. So it's something that you manipulate with your hands, but it's called Theatre for One. So where you have sometimes theatres where you'll have a big audience that might come into a big space, this is actually just one person at a time. So it's quite intimate, it's really engaging, it's quite practical, it's very visual, and it's quite interactive. So you know, you're encouraging, you know, whether it's someone who's 4 years old or 104 years old, everyone can enjoy it. It's only 3 minutes long, which makes it really easy, really flexible sort of a thing to.
And did you find it intimidating working in a prison at all?
I think the first time that I went into a prison, I was quite intimidated. You know, it's like a whole world in itself. You know, the physicality of the space. But with my interest being in theatre design and spaces, I think spaces for me are a very physical thing, but they're also a very metaphorical thing. People make spaces, people make homes, you know. So I think once I settled in, I think it was actually fine. For me, they're you know, human beings as well.
Who've lost their way sometimes.
Yeah. And that doesn't take away from the reasons that they're in there or what they've done. But ultimately, everyone's on a journey, whatever that journey is, and I really feel that actually in prisons there are some really great services in there that are, you know, education, informal education. There are library services and so on. You know, a lot of prisoners or a lot of offenders that will be in there won't have those very basic life skills, which enable them to get out and start up again.
So, I mean, that's really fascinating, because we've just talked about your experience in theatre design, talking about corner shops and the experience of South Asian people setting that up. We've just skipped across to your work in prisons with using puppetry as a tool to sort of engage and maybe lighten the mood a little bit. But another piece of work that you've been involved in is actually raising awareness of child sexual exploitation, which is a very serious subject, obviously. So and one would assume it doesn't lend itself to an artistic expression, you know, and it's an assumption. So what made you think, aha, this is a really important thing that I want to open up or explore, and I'm going to use a certain artistic approach? So could you sort of describe that for us?
Yeah, so it's called Grooming Ground, and it's called that because that's what it is. And CSE, child sexual exploitation, often the kind of grassroots bit of it kind of can get lost because we sometimes use these big words. But I kind of feel that, well, perhaps as my artistic license allows me to say as it is. And, you know, I think that there are people are growing towards having the discussion more about it. But it's very slow, and we need to kind of honour that, and I hope that my piece of work does do that, because it is a costume-led piece of work. It's about making the invisible visible. It's simply about going for a walk on the street, but it's a very visual. It's made up of so the actual piece of work is made up of stories or quotes from people who have actually suffered, or our families of perpetrators, or, you know, and in a way it's about documenting that, but in a very visual way, because the impact, the kind of ripple effect, or what is left of victims that have gone through.
Let me just describe it for our viewers a little bit, because I have seen it. So basically what Uzma's describing there is Uzma's created a dress, which is the costume, and it's covered in sort of
a lot of
rags, sort of ribbons and tendrils of different coloured black and red materials, and each of those has little messages on them which are saying are the expressions from people who've suffered, you know, from being groomed themselves, or families, or, you know, victims in the broadest sense of the crime that is exploitation. And then what Uzma's done is, one, made a small video, and another, a couple of times you've done this now, haven't you, where either yourself or a model has worn the dress and then literally just engaged with the space by walking around and letting people react to it, and then assess their own reaction.
Yeah. And I guess it is that thing of, because it's so visual, it's that visual language that's so important, that I think transcends universally. I think sometimes which words don't do. And especially on a topic like this, quite locally in our neighbourhoods, you know, perhaps with our next door neighbours, perhaps we don't know, you know. So with this piece of work, it's about exploring space and where this happens, and asking the question, well, is it happening closer to us than we think, and what do we think? So that's the basic message about it.
So it is quite fascinating, but I also am finding your journey quite interesting, because, and the thing I said right at the beginning, wasn't it, it's actually it's very easy just to think about art as something you do very personally. You make a painting, you make a piece of pottery, you make a sculpture, you put it on display somewhere, people come and look at it, and that's it. And that's just really couldn't be further from the truth, could it? So inshallah, at the other side of this break, we're going to pick up again and explore a little bit more about your dialogue work and how you use your artistic expression and license in a community setting, and then a little bit more about you as a trailblazer, actually, and a role model. No, because it's not a traditional craft in a way that many Muslim women would think to go into, and actually, you know, alhamdulillah, I think it's a strength that we've got different people representing in different walks of life. So inshallah, we'll be back in a few minutes after this short break.